The first letter. You cannot reasonably ask that I concede to you any other acquaintance with the order than it exists. What you would know from your books as to the nature of its existence I cannot recognize, since all this literary trash has begotten no knowledge in you, and has only entangled you in contradiction and doubt. What writers are you to trust if you have no measure by which to test them, and no means whereby to reconcile them? And as to what you believe, or, as you say, you may find more or less likely by a historical critique, I appeal to your own feeling, as I assert that your actual knowledge of the matter, taken strictly, extends to no more than the existence of the order. But this is complete enough for me, and I invite to you to add this sure knowledge conclusions, quite as sure. Then shall we find what the order of Freemasons is in and of itself. No, not that, but what it can be in and of itself, or, if you like, what it ought to be. The question will surprise you, since you have never put it, but it is one question that you can put. What the order is, so far as I'm concerned, you can, if it satisfies you, learn from the smashed Freemasons. What it can be, you can create from a better source, namely your reason. But if you know it, you will not believe, as something consisteth therewith, that it is actually, in and of itself, what it can be, according to your logical conviction. You will at least not be able to assert it, but also will not be able to deny it, since for that you would have to be an adept. You would have to first be full right a Masonic lawgiver before you could make this assertion, with some justification. In this field, where everything is shaking, let us see a fixed point on which we can put our foot securely, and from which we can go from uncontroverted facts. You know that in the first decades of the 18th century, and indeed in London, a society came into public notice which apparently had arisen earlier, but about which no one knew how to say whence it came, what it was, and what it sought. It spread, notwithstanding, with inconceivable rapidity, and traveled over France and Germany, into all the states of Christian Europe, and even to America. Men of all ranks, regents, princes, nobles, the learned, artists, men of business, entered it. Catholics, Lutherans, and Calvinists were initiated and called one another brother. The society, which one knows not why, at least, I bid you believe, quite accidentally, called itself the Society of Freemasons, drew upon itself the attention of governments. It was persecuted in most kingdoms, in France, the Netherlands, and Poland, Spain, Portugal, Austria, Bavaria, Naples, and visited with the ban of 2 popes, was loaded with the most contradictory accusations, and every suspicion which is hateful to the great mass of the people, and would make it hateful to them, was thrown at it. But it maintained itself under all these storms. It spread into new kingdoms, and from capitals was transplanted into provincial cities, where formerly one had scarcely heard the name. Unexpectedly, it found in one place protection and support, while in another it was at peril of extinction. In one place it was decried as the enemy of the throne and fomenter of revolutions, and in another won the trust of the best rulers. Thus it continued to our days. You see how today the members of the society ask themselves earnestly and continually, whence do we come? What are we, and what do we seek? You see how they gather from all places in order to answer those questions, how they look earnestly at each other, each awaits the answer from his neighbor, and finally all either aloud or in silence acknowledge that none of them, none of those who have assembled knows. What do they do now? Do they go home, declare the general ignorance of their brothers, release themselves reciprocally from their vows, and part ashamed? Not at all. The order endures and spreads itself as before. The society has undergone even harder things. The question as to its secrecy was more pressing. It was brought to general knowledge in published writings. Exposés have uncovered secrecy of the Freemasons, of the overthrown, of the betrayed Freemasonry. Someone extols the purpose of a certain Masonic sect, directed to perfect certainty. He then finds that here and there that Masonry has only served as a wrapping of objectionable purposes, and brings these purposes to a light fatal to it. What happens then? Do the Freemasons give up their betrayed secrets, and in order to free themselves of all suspicion of dishonest purposes, at once put the exposé in the lodge library? No. The society endures as if no slander had been spoken of it, nothing had been printed about it, and it had been preserved in inviolable silence. Finally, the society is torn apart internally. All unity ceases. It splits into sects, which are called systems. They brand each other as heretical, excommunicate one another, and repeat the plan of the Church with the exclusive plan of salvation. Servati asks, if I wish to become a Freemason, where dwell the genuine masters? In his thick volumes he does not know what to answer, since the Masons of shade and sign answer with one accord. Nowhere, nowhere than within us. What follows? The uninitiate, who formerly had at least respect for the name of brother, now finds the Masons persecuting each other and branding each other as heretics, ridiculous, and what for Masonry is worse than all persecution, the scoff and mockery of the elegant world. Now, without doubt, the dissolution of the wonderful society will follow. Again, no. It maintains itself and spreads as ever, and many a cowardly brother, who again and again blushed if someone in his elegant circle said he was a Freemason, goes scrupulously to the lodge as before. So as it was said sometimes in jest that the greatest secret of Freemasons was that they had none, the most open and yet secret of the Freemason is that they exist and endure. What is it then, what can it be, that binds together all these men of the most diverse modes of thought, modes of life, and education, and has held them to one another under 1,000 difficulties in this time of enlightenment and criticism? Let us go further and more closely consider these men themselves who adhere to Masonry. Perhaps they are weak-hearted enthusiasts, hypocrites, intriguers, or ambitious, who have bound themselves together. It is conceivable how dishonest and crafty can unite with fools in order to manage them for purposes or at least to make fun of their foolishness. It is conceivable how the ambitious capture their enthusiasts in their quest of secrets in order to humble their pride, and are able to take under their command men who in other respects stand above them in rank and dignity. It is conceivable how the intriguing can unite with the weak-headed in order to tell them and allow them to pay for what shall fall to their lot. But no, in all ages we find the wisest, most honorable, most honest, and in talent, learning, and character in the order. Above all, there are many, there is certainly one, into whose arms you will throw yourself with full trust as the leader and guide of your life. Yet, for I leave no possible objection behind me, the wise and honest man may through some accident or whim of youth have been enticed into an order of the inner nature of which was unknown to him. He becomes acquainted with it, finds nothing, and runs off to childish play. But he cannot go back. A certain pride hinders him from showing himself a victim of deceit. His inner shame leads him to give himself to the empty thing, and he goes back to it quietly, without looking up. Is this the true history of the honorable and wise men in the order? If so, we are at the end of our investigation. We are ashamed that we have bestowed so much attention upon the order, and give it with smiles to the well-meaning enthusiasts and self-seeking intriguers. But that this is not so, your experience and mine testify. The true, wise, and honorable men, whom or below being a man lies outside the circle of his thinking, striving and acting, we know have gone forward in the order, have busied themselves with it earnestly, and have worked for it in its own sake, and even sacrificed for it in other important ends. And now I'm at the point which I hold fixed, and sure for you, for the non-Mason, and for every consistent reason. As truly as only an indisputably wise and virtuous man busies himself earnestly within the order of Freemasonry, so truly it is no play, so certainly it has an earnest and lofty purpose. Thus we have found the standpoint from which we may survey all that remains, and set foot further with deliberation. But before we do this, I hear you speak thus. It is true, wise and virtuous men busy themselves earnestly within the order, it is fact. But with what do they busy themselves? With the order as it is, or how and what it, and indeed though it may come to be? Perhaps they only work so far as they make something of it and write something worthy of them in their tabula rasa of Freemasonry. If this is so, then you by your deduction have only proved what is known, namely, that the wise and virtuous do not play, but yet win nothing for Freemasonry. All constant, that I along with you can win for it. And since I cannot otherwise answer you whether it is likewise entirely sufficient for my final purpose, I conceive my thesis thus. As certainly as wise and virtuous men at any time busy themselves earnestly within the order of Freemasons, so certainly it can have a reasonable, good, and lofty purpose. This purpose, possible or actual, we shall now find as we go forward under this path. That is, we can know what the wise and virtuous man can will, what he necessarily must will. So certainly wisdom and virtue are but one, and are determined by eternal laws of reason. Therefore we must now investigate what the wise and good man may aim at in any such society. Then we have found with demonstrated certainty the one possible purpose of the order of Freemasons.